A voter ID law, the perennial solution in search of a problem, just passed in North Carolina's State House of Representatives late this afternoon. And that is just the beginning. Proposals have been cascading from that state's Republican-dominated legislature that make it harder to vote. Not for everyone, but for some. You see, the Senate is working on a bill that would shrink early voting by a week and would end same-day registration. But maybe the most partisan part of that bill is about those darn liberal-leaning, educated college students who like to read a little too much. You see, if they vote at their school where they live and in their school addresses instead of in their parents' homes, mom and dad under this bill cannot claim them as dependents. That's right, North Carolina Republicans would raise taxes, specifically on families who are already straining to put their kids through college. Why? Well, the Voter Integrity Project, which supports this bill, spells it out with uncharacteristic honesty. If other states pick up this legislation, it will shift the landscape of college town voting all across the nation and may even put college states like Massachusetts back into play. In other words, the good thing about this bill, it'll put these states back into play for Republicans. Let's bring in Reverend Dr. William J. Barber, president of North Carolina's NAACP, who spent the day at the House debate over the voter ID bill, and Penda, co-director of the Advancement Project, who's been following the legal issues surrounding these bills. Good evening. Thank you both for speaking with us.
Good evening. Good evening, John.
Thank you. Well, Reverend Barber, let me begin with you. What happened in the House today with voter ID?
50 years today after George Wallace engaged in his interposition and nullification, we saw the leaders of the Republican Party and their speaker really attempt to be the George Wallaces of the 21st century. They engaged in political tyranny, the arrogance of power. They passed a voter ID to suppress the vote in a state where 70% of African Americans voted in the last election, 68% of North Carolinians. We've had the highest per capita voting rate in any state in the Union the last few elections, and they know that the South is changing. They're trying to stop what I call the third Reconstruction, and they pass a voter ID that's unnecessary because we already had signature attestation with the felony if you lie, and we've not had any evidence of voter fraud. Their claim of fraud is fraudulent itself. So this is an attempt to roll back, this is an attempt to stop progress, and it is just so wrong and so arrogant, and we're going to fight it with everything we have legally and in the streets and otherwise.
And we've seen many measures like this across the country that tend to target minorities or poor folks or even seniors, and in this case, it's another one targeting college students. Ms. Hare, let me ask you, it's been reported there's a lot of public support for voter ID laws. Now, my mom and my brother both live in North Carolina. They don't agree, but do you believe that's true? Is there that much popular support for this?
I do not believe that's true, John. When voters find out that this is really about politicians who are manipulating the rules in order to stop certain people from voting because those folks are not likely to vote for those particular politicians, they do not support this type of highly restricted, probably illegal voter ID. In fact, a recent poll from the League of Women Voters shows that. And there is simply no justification. The public doesn't want it. As Reverend Barber said, this is not about stopping voter fraud. In fact, it's really just about stopping voting.
You'd think the conservatives would be more angry about this. It's a policy that will raise taxes and also wastes money right now on a problem that's not a real problem. But Reverend, as for the student registration law and the reduction of early voting, a clear majority of voters, as Ms. Hare indicated, say they're against it. So, sir, what is driving the legislature to do stuff like this?
Well, I think you have to look at history. You look at what happened to radical Dixiecrats that tried to block the first Reconstruction in the 1800s. What did they do? They attacked voting rights. If you look at when Richard Nixon wanted to roll back the civil rights movement in '68, what did they do? They attacked voting rights and promoted states' rights. So this group gets into office, and what do? They attack the sick. They cut 500,000 people from Medicaid. They take unemployment from 165,000 people. And now they're trying to roll back voting rights because they know the demographics have shifted. They can't win a fair election. The only way they can win an election is to rig it. So they want to take back all the things we've won recently: same-day registration, early voting, Sunday voting. And with students, you should know that today there are 36 private schools in North Carolina. They voted today not to allow the voter IDs from those schools to even be allowed.
You're kidding. Can you say that again, Reverend? I think that's a pretty pertinent point.
There are 36 private schools in North Carolina, and many of the legislators went to one of those schools. They voted today that if you go to a private school, that idea of that private school is not allowed. So for instance, if you're at North Carolina State, yours would be allowed. If you're at Shaw University, a black school, it wouldn't. If you're at Peace College, a private school, a women's college, it wouldn't. But if you're at UNC, it would. So they promised to be about jobs. Instead, they have been about division. They've been about disparity and creating more discrimination. It's radical because they're so afraid that an electorate that's made up of blacks and whites, progressive whites and Latinos and LBGT and faith and students will radically shift the South. And if it radically shifts the South, it's going to radically shift the nation. And they're trying to stop it in North Carolina because they know North Carolina tends to be progressive. If you stop it here, you certainly can undermine it across the rest of the South.
It seems like it almost might be easier to try to just win on the issues for once. Ms. Hare, have you been seeing an increase in voting reform proposals lately?
Absolutely. Since 2010, this has swept across the country, and it's been brought on, as I said, by politicians who gain control of state legislatures and want to keep control by rigging the election and changing the rules. So Advancement Project has been involved in litigation in Missouri, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Texas, and others have brought lawsuits in South Carolina. And all of these laws have been stopped either temporarily or permanently by the courts. And I believe it is because they've seen through the thin justification that's been asserted for stopping people from voting.
Is there any way, Ms. Hare, that this would actually save money as the law's proponents claim it would?
No, it will cost the state. In fact, the state's own budget committee says it's going to cost, I think, over $3 million. And we believe that it would be much higher for them to actually implement it and try to get the ID to every voter and every potential voter. And we don't even think it's possible to do that. But I think it would be several millions of dollars just to try at a time when the money could be better spent on people who have real needs.
Reverend, we just have about a minute left. Let me give you the last word on this. The people who are trying to reduce early voting say it'll save money again, but with the student voting proposal in place, Jay Delancey of Voter Integrity Project said it just makes students equal to other short-term residents like teachers or soldiers who use absentee ballots. Does that make sense to you?
Well, none of their arguments make sense because it's illogical from the start. We have the best law in place. Interestingly, today, they actually said that they will accept a signature for someone to get an ID if they sign and say under the affidavit, under the penalty of perjury, but they won't accept that when it comes to vote, which is the law of the land. Look, North Carolina has the best laws. We've already proven that. We've not needed voter ID for 237 years of elections. What this law does, it violates Section 1 of the North Carolina Constitution. It violates Section 6 of the North Carolina Constitution that says the legislature has no authority to qualify voters in this way. It violates the 24th Amendment against poll tax, because that's really what it is, a poll tax. It violates the 15th Amendment because it abridges the right to vote. It violates the Voting Rights Act. It violates the fundamentals of our democracy. And it will cost us not only in dollars, but it will cost us because it will cut at the heart and soul of our democracy. We intend to fight it. We intend to be with the courts, with Advancement Project and Penda and Southern Coalition and others. We also are going to be engaging in active civil disobedience. They will not do this in the dark. The light will be shown on it. And this coming Sunday, we're meeting with clergy and people from across the state at Pilgrim United Church of Christ to plan and to announce several acts of civil disobedience. This is just wrong. It's bad, reverse, regressive ideology that must be stopped.
Reverend Dr. William J. Barber of the North Carolina NAACP and Penda Hare of the Advancement Project, thank you both for your service. Thank you for being with us on Viewpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of voter problems, the George W. Bush Library opens tomorrow, answering the question, what kind of library can you have without history or science? My panel of non-experts joins me next.